The dark side of IMF and World Bank. For decades, two institutions have shaped the fate of nations: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. To many people, these organizations look like global saviors. They promise stability, they promise development, they promise hope. But behind the glossy words and smiling press conferences lies a darker reality, a reality of debt traps, political pressure, economic dependency, and a silent control over the destiny of entire countries. Today, you and I are going to uncover that hidden world, the world where money becomes power and power becomes control. Let's begin. Imagine a country suffering from crisis, rising inflation, falling currency, unemployment soaring, foreign investors pulling out. And when things look desperate, a government often turns to the IMF. They ask for help. And the IMF says, "Of course, we will help you." But help always comes with conditions. These conditions are not small. They reshape the entire economy. They decide how people live, what governments can spend money on, and even how fast the country can grow. This is where the dark side begins, because when a nation signs an agreement with the IMF or takes a development loan from the World Bank, it is not just borrowing money, it is borrowing control, giving away part of its economic freedom. The conditions attached to these loans are called structural adjustment programs. They sound technical, they sound harmless, but in many countries, they became the source of disaster. Let's break this down. One of the most powerful conditions is austerity. The IMF often demands that governments cut spending, reduce subsidies, reduce public services, increase taxes, remove price controls, privatize industries, and allow foreign corporations easy entry. On paper, it sounds like efficiency, but in real life, it means something else. Higher prices, fewer jobs, weaker national industries, and more foreign control. Many countries, from Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia, went through the same cycle. Their governments borrowed money. They accepted IMF conditions. Their economy shrank even more. Poverty increased. Local industries died. And then they had to borrow more and more and more. A perfect debt trap. The IMF always says these policies are necessary for stability. But whose stability? For the ordinary citizens or for the global financial system? Because while local people suffer, foreign investors suddenly find a profitable environment. Cheap labor, easy privatization deals, weak regulations, and governments too dependent to say no. In country after country, public assets, electricity, water, transport, mines, telecom, were sold to private corporations for extremely low prices. Who benefited? Not the local people, not the taxpayers. It was multinational companies, foreign investors, and political elites. This is the hidden cycle of IMF dependency. Now let's talk about the World Bank, the sister institution. While the IMF deals with crises, the World Bank deals with development. Roads, dams, energy projects, social programs, all good things. But the reality is more complicated. World Bank loans often come with specific contractors, consultants, and project rules. And guess where these companies usually come from? From rich Western countries. So the money that developing nations borrow often goes right back to the rich nations in the form of contractor payments. The country gets debt. The foreign companies get profit. This is the quiet cycle of extraction. And what happens when countries cannot pay back? They must borrow again, or they must give concessions. Mining rights, land rights, political influence, resource access, or favorable corporate tax policies. In some countries, World Bank-funded projects displaced millions of people from their homes. Large dams flooded entire villages. Forests were destroyed. Indigenous communities were pushed out. And every time problems appeared, the World Bank would release a new report. Project faced challenges, outcome moderately satisfactory. But the country still had to pay the debt. Now let's talk about something even more sensitive: political influence. Both the IMF and World Bank claim they are neutral. But neutral organizations do not have voting systems where the United States and Europe hold the majority of power. Neutral organizations do not give the US Treasury one of the biggest seats at the table. Neutral organizations do not push economic policies that benefit Western financial institutions. In simple words, rich countries control the rules, poor countries follow them. When governments refuse to obey, something interesting happens. Funding gets delayed, loan packages get rejected, credit ratings mysteriously fall, and foreign investors suddenly panic. It is a form of pressure, silent but extremely powerful. You rarely see this in headlines, but politicians in many countries openly admit we cannot go against IMF conditions. Why? Because going against the IMF is like going against the global financial system. This is how economic sovereignty slowly disappears. But here's the biggest twist. The IMF and World Bank were created to help prevent crises. Yet many economists argue that their policies actually created long-term dependency. Countries keep coming back again and again, borrowing more money, losing more control, and making deeper sacrifices. It is almost like a cycle designed to never end. Some nations tried to break free. Malaysia refused IMF loans during the 1997 crisis and recovered faster than IMF-supported countries. Iceland rejected IMF austerity and chose a different path, and eventually stabilized. China built its own development banks, challenging the World Bank's influence. BRICS created their own lending system to escape the dollar-based pressure. The world is beginning to wake up. Because in many places, people now ask a simple question. If the IMF and World Bank are supposed to help, why did so many countries end up poor after their programs? Not all programs were failures, of course. Some countries benefited when policies were applied carefully. Some governments misused funds. Some crises were unavoidable. But the pattern is too large to ignore, and too consistent to be a coincidence. At the center of the issue is this truth. Debt is power. Debt is control. Debt lets outsiders shape the decisions of sovereign nations. And the IMF and World Bank became the architects of a global system where money decides the destiny of nations. The dark side is not that these institutions exist. The dark side is that they have become tools of influence, tools of pressure, and in some cases, tools of silent domination. They decide which policies are acceptable, which governments are responsible, which currencies are trustworthy, and which future a country is allowed to have. In the modern world, war is rare, but economic control, that is the new battlefield. And the IMF and World Bank are two of the most powerful players. So as you watch countries fall into debt crises, currency collapses, or economic instability, remember, sometimes the enemy is not inside the country. Sometimes the real power lies in boardrooms thousands of miles away, where decisions are made quietly, without elections, without accountability, and without the voice of the people who will suffer the consequences. This is the dark side of the IMF and World Bank. And this story is far from over.